I'm in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences. I'm a professor. I spent many years as the Senior Associate Dean of the school. When I first came into the school, I came in 1980, it was not in good shape. There had been a major scandal about 10 or 15 years before I ever came here. The school was decimated. It was kind of put in a holding position, and it was only due to Dr. Walsh, Dr. John Walsh, who was the chancellor at the time, who even kept it alive. But it wasn't a school. It was just kind of threads here and there. We got put on probation and given 2 years. And so I tried to talk to Dr. Banna, and he goes, well, you know, this is probably just the end of the school. And we're like, oh, no, this is my job. I've now fallen in love with this. I'm not gonna let it go. So I went and I talked to John Walsh. I don't know why I did, I just made an appointment. He saw me, and he kind of looked down, and I know he was saying, honey, you're so naive. But anyway, so I said, unless we make some major changes, we're gonna lose accreditation, and then we'll go away. And he goes, well, what are you gonna do about it? And I said, well, and I gave him some ideas. He goes, okay. And so he came, and soon after that, Tom Hamrick replaced Banta as the dean. And so they picked me as the associate dean. What did I know about anything? But part of it was to do the accreditation. So, I sat and I said, okay, how do I convince these accreditors? Because in 2 years, you couldn't do anything. But how can we have a plan? So I wrote a strategic plan. I just wrote and wrote and wrote, just all these visions of what we could do, how we could do it, and the strategic plan. Well, the strategic plan, it must have been pretty good because it was adopted by the university. When the accreditors came back in 2 years, they read the plan and they said, this is a vision. And so they gave us 5 years to pull things together. So that started my work in administration. And that's when I formed my center down here, the Center for Applied Environmental Health, and used it as a hub for many of the grants that I've had. Over the time, I probably had over $75 million worth of grants and averaged at least $1 million to $2 million every year for 40 years. Your legacy is only as good as people remember you, and once you're gone, you're gone. But I do think that I have contributed over the years to the advancement of the whole science of environmental health. And I think the center here will go on. I think Stephen Murphy will do really well in growing it. I think while it's not necessarily a personal legacy, I think I've been instrumental in growing the school and bringing it from a very weak school to a very strong school, over the 40 years that I have been here. And so I don't expect that to be a personal legacy, but in my mind, I know that I have made great contributions both in the field of environmental health and in the school to make it be the place of excellence that it now is. The one thing that I find is that often when people come out, they've just gotten their PhD, they're starting the faculty, all they can think of is the research that they've always done, which is fine. That might not always be funded every year. We may not have the resources. You may be the Lone Ranger. It's hard to do things as the Lone Ranger. So sometimes you have to morph your interest into what is the hot topic of the year, because that's what's going to be funded. What you studied may no longer be funded, and you have to always be looking for how do I get funding. I've had several faculty who've worked on the projects, both as students and then as young faculty, and I've seen many of them grow and establish their own programs, and that is very hard working. But those who I've seen are successful, not just with me, but with others, they've worked with other senior faculty for a while, and then they spread their wings. Public health is really in its prime, I would say. People know what it is. People want to come into public health. Our greatest challenges are in the social determinants of health, because that's where, when you look at chronic disease and you look at the leading causes of death and chronic diseases is right there. So making those changes is both on an individual level and on a community societal level. But I don't think that environmental health takes credit for what has been done. And so you can't move forward if you keep trying to do the old things. So, it's looking, some of the new things that they're looking at exposure level assessment, where we're getting down to where we're modeling because its concentration so low that we cannot measure them. So they're modeling. So, environmental health has to be much more data-driven, much more statistically oriented, much more building models than the old days where we just dumped and measured.